And then sticking with the idea of characterization, do you think that characterization is essential to narrative, at least in prose? And if not, what other tactics can raise great art from that?
I've always said that characterization is plot. Plot is character. No one, ultimately, no one cares about cardboard cutouts. Michael Bay movies transferred to a book into writing just become crap. I mean, you have to, you have to, you can have things that are seemingly plot driven, but if you layer them correctly, you can see that it's in the purpose of the character. I do it more overtly in the sense that I'm talking about characters. Little things happen, little incidents happen, but they serve to give uh, an insight into the character. Another character in the spy book I'm writing about is called Bert Convy. He was a game show host in America. He hosted Super Password. He hosted a show called Tattletales in the 70s. He was a real life C-list celebrity. He did some acting too. And he is part of the spy agency, the fictional spy agency that the main character works for, and he's sort of the mentor. He's a few years older than the main spy character of Elias Walker, and we see him from his his once I think a little bit before he became a spy, and then also to his death in real life in 1991, and what caused that. And I paint him totally opposite his real life persona. His real life persona was as this sort of Dick Clark character. Dick Clark from American Bandstand was famously known as the world's oldest teenager because he seemed to look so good, even though he was 60 or 70 before he died. Bert Convy, too, looked years younger than he really was. He died when he was 57 or 58. But he was this handsome guy with jet black hair, hosted these game shows. Housewives loved him in the 60s, 70s, 80s. But he was a C-list celebrity who was constantly making goofy jokes, whatnot. But I use him as a psychopathic killer in the book. He's one of these guys who's like William Calley, who did the My Lai massacre, the Vietnam War. If he goes in and he has to do something, the people in the intelligence agency are scared shit that he's going to massacre villages and whatnot. And I have one good scene during the Indonesian revolution where communists tried to take over Indonesia, where I have the character. There's a scene where he follows this rebel leader through caves and whatnot, ends up killing the rebel leader, and just stands there sort of smoking a cigarette as the body is bleeding out in this cave that has an underground well to the ocean. And the water starts seeping up, and then the blood fills with it, and it's sort of like pink water. And then we see little crabs coming up from below and to start devouring the corpse. And it's very symbolic of the way the character is presented in the whole book. And moments like that give a far the character is shown as very superficial and vain, which Bert Convy presumably was in real life, from what I've read. He never could pass a mirror without adjusting his hair. Although in my version of Bert Convy, he's wearing a toupee, and he's sensitive about his looks and whatnot. And there's a character another character who's a philosopher who's based on the character in La Dolce Vita that the Marcello character envies. And I have him follow a very similar arc, although I go far, far deeper than La Dolce Vita does into this character, so that we know some of the reasons this spy has existential angst, because he encounters characters like this Michael Nur character. He encounters characters like Bert Convy. He encounters this philosopher who ends up doing something terrible, and he encounters them, and it reflects on his own life. And there are smaller little segments where he's talking about the various lovers he has, and we see them throughout the book. And we see a few vignettes that are very James Bondian, where he has to kill a real life Soviet mass murderer named Alexander Solonik, who was called Super Killer. He actually existed and was killed by foreign agents in Greece. And in my book, he's killed by my spy character. And it's done in a very nonchalant way, but it's the antithesis of like the Massapequa massacre in the Vincetti brothers. But all of these things make the character. And so I can tell you by the book opens with the character accidentally running over a cat when he's driving as a near 80-year-old, and the book is going to end in a similar place. I'm not exactly where, but it's got 27 chapters. So I just wrote the first part of chapter 1 today. I'll write the first part of the chapter 27 tomorrow, but I basically finished the 25 chapters in between. But I had to finish those chapters because I didn't know exactly how I was going to get there. So I know the book, how it begins and it ends, and I can tell you how the book begins and it ends because the plot is utterly irrelevant. It's about the character. It's not how it happens, but why it happens, and the way it happens. And this is something that people have to get away from. If people are to evolve, narrative is inherent in our system, in the way our brains are wired. But we have to get away from the A to B to C plot-driven narrative and get to the point where, okay, I can tell you the narrative arcs of all my books, but it's not going to stop your enjoyment from it in the least. And that's the kind of writing, that's the kind of art that needs to be. It has to be deeper. It has to be lusher. It has to be more essential and integral to who we are.